Hi, my name is Vivien Jovet. I'm the team lead for Coder Studio development team at Toro. In this video, we are going to create our very first workflow using Toro Integrate and Coder Studio. First of all, what is a workflow and what is a workflow engine? So a workflow engine is an application that handles business processes for you based on the workflow that you define. Workflow includes executing actions in certain order, making automated decisions based on data, or waiting for the intervention of, for example, a human or another system to determine how to proceed and where to go next. So the implementation of a workflow engine in Toro Integrate is called Toro Flux Engine, and the workflow is called Flux Service. So let's get started and create our first Flux service. First thing we're going to do is create an integrate package so that we can put our Flux service in it. I'm going to right click here and select new integrate package. Then we're going to call it workflow and press finish. So you can see now I have my integrate package here. And in that code folder, that's where we're going to create our first Flux service. So for this tutorial, we're going to create a very simple workflow. It's going to be a purchase requisition workflow. So an employee sends an email to a certain email address. That email gets processed. Based on the request, it's going to go to a certain person for approval. And if the request is approved, we'll have another action. And if the request is denied, we're going to have another action. So first thing we're going to do is create our new Flux. So I can right click on the code folder, select new and Flux service. Or what I can also do is press the Command N shortcut and search Flux. And you can see the Flux wizard appears. So I'm going to click next. We're going to create a purchase requisition Flux. And press finish. Alright, so now we have the Flux editor that is open and we have a blank canvas. Before we dive into the tutorial and the example, let me show you around a few things about Flux. So Flux is made of states and you go from one state to another using a transition. So to create a state, you can click on the blank of the canvas, right click here, use the add Flux state or the Alt-A shortcut. Flux state has a name. So for example, let's give it the name state1. The next thing we can do is create another state in the same way, state2. And then we can create a transition from state1 to state2. So I can just again drag my transition by going to the edge of the state here and then drag it and drop it into the other state. So now it's asking me to enter an event, and that's an important thing because the Flux engine is event-based. So to go from one state to another, it needs to receive an external or internal event that will tell him which transition to use so that it knows what's the next state. So in this case, we're just going to call it my event. There. So now you might notice that those two states have different color. The first one has a green color and the last one has a red color. The green color means that this is the start state. So that means that's the entry state. When the Flux is started, that's the first state that's going to be invoked. The red one, on the other hand, means that is a terminal state, meaning that the Flux can end if it reaches that state. So there is nowhere to go after that state. Next thing is a Flux service and a state can both have an input or an output. So for example, if I click on the block on the canvas, I can see that I can have an input and an output similarly to a group service. So I can enter properties here. For example, let's say my Flux input. And similarly to a for a state, I can have input and output property. So I can say, for example, here is going to be my state output. And here, let's give it an input. Oops, right here. So I'm going to add my state input. And when I click on the transition here and go to the mapper, I can see that I can also do mapping here. So for example, I can map this state output to the state input. And you notice that over here I get an error that's telling me that my state has a transition with the name my event, but the Flux event is never set to map to that event. So you can see that in my mapper here, I have a $Flux event. So that property is available in every state for every action. And it's the property that tells the Flux engine which transition should it use to go to the next state. So in this case, we want the Flux state to simply log something. So we're gonna set the action. So Flux state can have different type of action. If you want to set an action, you can go to the properties view and click here on the button to open the Flux action dialog. Another way to do it, and that's the preferred one, is select a state and press the dot key. Then you can use content assist, and you can search for an action. So you can say I can have a Groovy step here, and I can also have gloop, invoke a gloop service. I can invoke code. I can invoke another Flux service as well. So in this case, we're just going to log using an invoke code action. I'm going to press enter, and you can see that now my mapper has an input and an output. So for the input, I'm just going to map this here. And then for the output, I'm going to create expression by double clicking it. And I'm going to say, this is a test output. And the next thing that we want to do is set the Flux event. So same thing, I'm going to double click on it and just hard code the event in that case. Next thing, we have already our mapping here from state input to the output, and what we're going to do is again simply log. So it's just to demonstrate basic use of Flux. So in this case, we are going to map the input to the message and terminate the Flux. So let's save that. Now, when you are within Coder Studio, there's an easy way to test your Flux or your workflow is by right-clicking in the Canva here and then go to Run As and Flux Service. Once you're here, you'll have an input dialog when you can select which state you want to start to. So by default, it will use the start state. You can enter tags. Some Flux can be tagged so that you can search them on later. And over here, we have our input. So in this case, I'm going to say this is a test Flux input, and let's run it. So you will see that the Flux completed, and I got some logs. So the first log came from the state 1 where it says this is a state input, and then it transitioned to the state 2, passing the output of the state to the input of state 2, and then I log it as well, and it says this is test output. So this is a very simple example. So now let's dive into a more real life and complex example. So I'm gonna drag here and select all my state and delete them. Same thing for the Flux input. Let's reset that and let's get started. So like I said, our example is going to be a purchase requisition workflow. And the first thing I want to do is create my model that represent the purchase request. So I'm going to create a new gloop model here. I'm going to name it purchase request and press finish. So our purchase request is going to have a few fields. The first field is a string that's going to be the employee address that send the request. I'm going to add a string here and call it employee address. The next one is going to be the amount. So this time I'm going to use content assist, pressing dot, and I'm going to type big, and I'm going to use a big decimal for that. I'm going to call it cost. Next one is another string for the name of the item. And lastly, another string for the reason. So why should we purchase that item? So let's save that, quit, and then let's go back to our Flux. So like I said before, what we want is that we receive an email and then we process that email to create a purchase request from it. So to do so, we're gonna go to our Flux input here, press the dot for content assist, and then I'm gonna search for the message model, which is here. So the email message. So that basically represents a message in an email inbox. So you can see I have my to address, from, I have my attachment, subject, and body. And now what we want to do is take this message and transform it to a purchase request model that we have here. So to do that, I'm going to use a group service. So we're going to go back to the code folder here, new group service. And we're going to call it process email message and click finish. So same thing here. I'm going to go to the input and output view. In the input here, I want also to have my message as inputs. So I'm going to search that again and select email message. And our output here is going to be the purchase request model that we created. So I can drag and drop it into the output. All right, so now let's take that email message and transform it into this purchase request here. So to do so, I'm going to add a map step. So I'm going to press dot for content assist and search for the map step. There we are. I'm going to double click on that map step to activate the mapper. And now what we want to do is map from this message object or model to this purchase request model. So there is a few obvious one is the from address is going to be the employee address. The reason is going to be the body of the email. And then for the subject, we're going to say that we have a specific syntax where we gonna have the item name and the cost within the subject. So to do that, I'm going to evaluate that script here. And I'm going to add an expression to the cost, which is going to be message dot, we're going to use the subject. And then we're going to substring that to the dash. So we're going to say substring after. And then here we're going to give it the dash. Then we're going to trim it so that it's not having any extra white space. And we want to replace, for example, a dollar sign if there is any, so that it can be parsed to a big decimal. So I'm going to press OK and do basically the same thing for the item, but what we want is substring before that dash. So let's do the same thing, message dot subject dot then we want substring before and the dash, and then again same thing, we want to trim it. So what we're gonna have now is if the subject is something like that, my item, then the dash, and then let's say $10. This part here is gonna be our cost, and this part here is gonna be our item. All right, so let's press OK, save that. So once we have purchase item created, let's just log it so that we can see that something's happening. So I'm going to press content assist info. In the message, I'm going to evaluate it and say processed message purchase order is, and then I'm going to use the item here. So I'm going to use the groovy string syntax. And then we're going to use the cost here. And then we're done. So the message is going to be processed message, purchase request, purchase item, and then the cost. So let's press OK and save that. So now that we have our group service that is transforming the message to a purchase request, we can use it in our Flux service. And the nice thing that you can do is drag this group service and drop it into the Flux service. So you can see that now I have a state that is created. So let's rename that state in something a bit nicer. So I'm going to right click on it, and then you can select rename or press the F2 shortcut. So I'm going to rename it purchase request received and press OK. So you can see now the name changed. Next thing that we want to do is save that request so that we can use it later on. I'm going to click in the blank here, and I'm going to add the purchase request as output of my Flux. So I'm going to type the name, purchase request. That's good. Going back to my state, double clicking on it to go to the mapper. I'm going to map again to the purchase request here. And then we want to set the Flux event to go into a certain state if the amount is over 1000, and under 1000 we'll go to another state. So what we're going to do is double click that Flux property, Flux event property. We're going to evaluate our expression. And then the expression is going to be if the purchase request dot amount, cost is greater than 1000, then we're going to return a over 1000. And if it's not an over 1000, then we're going to call it under 1000. So basically, if cost is, for example, 2000, it's going to return this event, and otherwise it's going to return this event here. So I'm going to press OK here. Let's not forget to map our message here to the input of the group service. And let's save that and see what we can do with it already. So now for now, we just have one state, but we can actually test it. So I'm going to right click and run it. So run as Flux service. And you can see here now I have my input model of message. So the nice thing is that even though you don't send a message, you don't send a re-email, you can actually test it. So it's really nice. So the from is going to be my email address. I'm going to click add. And I'm just going to set an email address here. And the subject is going to be, let's say, new item, the $10. And the body is, that's what I need. Right, so if we run that, you can see that our group service was invoked, and it says that we processed the message and purchase request is new item with a cost of 10. All right. So next thing we want to do is create the two other state. So the two other state are going to be, if it's over $1,000, we need the approval of the head department. If it's under $1,000, we just need the approval of the manager. So to create the state, I'm gonna right click again and add a Flux state. We're gonna name it wait for manager approval. There. And what we want to do now is create a transition between the two. So again, I can drag at the edge of my state and drop it into the other state. And we're going to call that event under 1000. So if the Flux event is under 1000, it's going to go to our state here. Now this state here is a bit different because it is not going to process the data by a system, but it's going to wait for a human intervention. So the intervention of the manager approving the purchase request. So in our case, we want the state to wait until the approval of the manager. And to do so, we're going to go to the properties here and we're going to set the waiting property to true. So once I do like that, you can see that now I have a little hand icon here that's saying that this state will be waiting for something. So when you have a waiting state, the state input is defining what type of event, so what's the data of the event that you're expecting, and the transition are going to define what are the events that you're accepting. So let's first define the input of the state. So in that case, I'm going to create a model that's going to be containing two property. So I'm going to name it the result, and it's going to have two property. One is a boolean, and it's going to be telling us if the request was approved, and the other one is a string that's saying the reason of the approval or the denial. So now that I have my input, what I want is to do something with it. So once we receive the event, I'm going to have it in my mapper here. You can see that I get the result as input of my mapper, and in this case we are going to simply log the event. So I'm going to use again an info method here, and we're going to set the message by double clicking on the property, and the message is going to be purchase. First we're going to evaluate it, of course, and say purchase request is, and then we want to say either is approved or is denied. So I'm going to use again a groovy string syntax. And we're going to say result dot approve. So if it's approved, we want to print approved, if it's denied, then we want to print denied. So denied here. And then lastly, I want to also print the reason. So I'm going to do the same thing here. It's going to be result.reason. So the message is going to be purchase request is either approved or denied, and the reason is something. So let's press OK. Next thing that we want to do is for the approval of the head department, and in that case it's almost exactly the same thing. So I can select that Flux state here, right click on it, select copy, click here, right click, and then paste it. So I have basically the same thing. So only thing we need to change is the name. So I can again select rename here, and then we're going to change it for wait for head department approval. All right, let's press OK. Same thing, we want to connect this state to this one. So I can drag here, drop it on it, and our event is going to be over 1000. Okay, so now that we are starting to have a bit more state, let's organize it. So what I can do is click on the snap to grid here and show the grid over here. And then I can position my Flux state. And you will see that automatically it's snapping them to the grid. So let's put that over here. And then we're good. All right, so next thing is when the request is either approved or denied, we want to go to the next state. So let's first do the request approved. So to create a state, like I show, you can use the add Flux state here menu. But another nice way to do it is by dragging a transition, dropping it where you want the state to be. You give a name to your state. So for the request approved, we're going to imagine that it's going to create a task to the purchase department. So for now, for keeping it simple, we're just going to log the request approval. But you can imagine that it could be creating a task system management and things like that. So I'm going to name it create purchase task. The event is going to be approved and press OK. So now I'm prompted to select the action of the state. And like I said, again, in this case, it's just going to be logging the approval. So I'm going to say here, and I'm going to evaluate that. And it's going to be creating purchase task for, then we're going to give it the name of the purchase request, so the item. And then we're going to say with costs, and then again, we're going to have the purchase request dot cost. So it's going to say creating purchase task for name of the item with the cost amount over there. So I'm going to press OK here. And before we forget, we want also to have a transition from here to here. So again, I'm going to drag it now here, and this one is going to be approved as well. And so now you can notice that those two are no more terminal state because they have transition, and this one is our terminal state. So the second possibility now is that the request is denied. And for the request denied, what I want to do is that it's going to send back an email to the employee address saying that the request was denied. So again, I'm going to drag a transition here and drop it there. And we're going to give it a name, purchase requests denied. The event is going to be denied. For the actions here, we will see later. And first, we're going to create the transition here before we forget. And that's going to be also denied. All right, so now let's make this state send an email. So we're going to press the dot key again. And then I'm going to search the email methods. And you can see that I have two methods, and one of them is for sending an email. So to send an email, there's a bunch of fields that we need to fill up. For the destination, so the to address, that's easy. We're just going to use the from to send it back, basically. For the protocol, I'm going to use SMTPS. The login is going to be this one. So I already have it here. I'm going to set it to that. The password is going to be this one. The server will be the Gmail one. Port is 587. And the from here is the same as the login. So I'm going to set that over here. All right. So next thing we want to do is give it a subject. So for the subject, it's simple. I'm going to say purchase request denied. And for the body, let's give it also a nice message. Your purchase request was denied. All right. So now we have configured Flux, and let's save it and try it out. So again, we're gonna run as Flux service. Let's run it with the same message and see what happened. So now when I'm running that, you can see that I have my process message log here, but there's nothing else. So the reason why is because since we have a $10 item, the current state is this one and is actually waiting. And to show you that it's waiting, we can check the Integrate Service Manager view over here in the main toolbar. And when I open that, you can see that I have a purchase requisition Flux that is waiting. So what we want to do next is send an event to that Flux saying that we either approve or deny the purchase request. So you can imagine that instead of me manually sending an event here, it could be coming from an application like a web application. You press a button and it sends the approval or the denial. So to send an event, I have two choices. I can right click on my instance here, select Flux and send the event. But the nicest way to do it is to actually click on the state where you want to send the event. You right click and then you click on send Flux event. When I do so, you will see that I have a pre-populated event data. For the event name, in this case, we're going to use approved. And we're going to say approve is true. And we're going to say something like enjoy. All right, now let's send the event. And you can see that now I have other logs. And it says that my purchase request is approved. The reason is enjoy. And then we have the other log, which is this one, the last one, and purchase request task with new item and cost 10. And if we click in the Flux output, you can see that I have my purchase request that is used as output. So let's try now the request denied. Let's see what we can get with that. So we're going to run it again with the same message for now. So you can see I get the log again. And my Flux is now waiting, and you can see it's a different ID. So let's send a message again and see what happened. So this time we're gonna deny it. And here is gonna be false. The reason is gonna be you don't deserve it. Send the event. So you see now I get my log that says that the request is denied. The reason is you don't deserve it. And then my Flux is completed. And if I actually check my emails now, you will see that I receive an email saying that purchase request was denied and the body is purchase request was denied. All right, so now that's nice. We're able to run our Flux. It does exactly what we want. But what we actually would like to do is to expose that Flux service, so that workflow, by sending a real email to a real email address. So what the easiest way to do that is you click on your Flux file, you right click and you do new, expose as endpoint. Then you can see that it's automatically detecting that we want to have an email endpoint, and I'm going to give it a name, purchase requisition email. press finish, you can see that my service is automatically selected here. And the only thing to do that I need to do is to fill up this section over here. So we're going to choose the host to be Gmail. The username is going to be again our email address here. The password is going to be the same thing. Oops, here. And then let's say that for the polling interval, we want 3 seconds. Let's not forget also to check the SSL here. Save the endpoint. So now you can see that I have my endpoint created here, and I can just start it. All right. So now that we have our endpoint started, we can start sending an email to it. But since I want to see the logs, what I'm going to do is right click on my instance and select Open Integrate Console. So that way you can see the logs that we are logging. So let's say, let's send a real email. So I'm going to write my email here to purchase.requisition@torocloud.com and say, I want a new monitor. And the cost is going to be $100. I'm going to say, because 4 monitors is better than 3. And let's send that. So now, if we look at the logs, within 3 to 5 seconds, we should see a log saying that it's processing the email. So let's wait for a bit. All right, so now we have our log here saying that it processed the message. The purchase request is new monitor for $100. And if we go back to our Integrated Service Manager, we can see that we have a Flux waiting. And it should be waiting for the approval of the manager. So let's approve it here. True. Reason is going to be try. Let's send the event. Now we can see in the logs that it's actually logging it, and we have also our task that is logged as well. So now let's try again with another one that we're going to deny this time. And let's say new car, and it's going to be $100,000. And let's say I want a fancier car. All right, let's send that. So again, let's wait 3 to 5 seconds for the email endpoint to poll the new email. All right, here we are. We have the process message, purchase request is new car for $100,000. And of course, let's deny that. So the head department now is going to deny the request. Let's set a Flux event, and we're going to use the event denied. Approved true. Reason is it's too costly. All right, let's send that. Then you can see again, I have my log here, and it's actually sending the email as we speak. And if I check my email here, you can see that again, I have a new email. So that's all. We have finished our very simple purchase requisition workflow. And you can see how easy is it to build your workflow with a Flux service, and how every feature of Integrate is also incorporated into it. So you can have invoke code, you can have group service, you can expose your Flux with an endpoint. And there's actually much more that you can do with Flux service, like have a state that is waiting a certain time. You can transition to a state on a certain date or after a certain duration, etc. So that's all for this video, and thank you for watching.